So I am obviously honored and thrilled to be joined by Ginny Hogan. Ginny, I will let you give the proper introduction on just some of your background, but I wanted to start by thanking you for making the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really nice to be here. So I'm a writer. I live in Los Angeles right now. I'm from New York originally, and I moved to San Francisco just after college and worked in the tech industry for a little bit. And when I lived there, I started doing stand-up comedy, and I was writing a blog that I think Stu probably had wanted to ask about. It started out as about data science, and then I started making it like more humorous, and that's around the time I started doing comedy. So yeah, then I moved to New York and did stand up there for a couple of years, and then moved to LA. And I've written I'm overall like a comedy writer, but I'm trying to expand. I've written some personal essays. I'm trying to get into like short stories right now. I've been reading a lot of short stories. I think it's just like a very interesting format that I haven't explored that much. But yeah, I'm interested in writing all kinds of things. And I obviously haven't been doing stand-up for the past year because of the pandemic, but I did do a lot of stand-up before. And it's very much influenced my writing, even my like non-comedic writing. So I'm also, happy to take questions on stand-up or to talk about that.
Awesome. Yeah. I definitely want to get into it because I think stand-up is, if we're afraid of sending newsletters and tweets, I can't imagine how much harder it is to get in front of a room of strangers to perform. So definitely want to jump into that. And we're going to talk about a lot of what Ginny just shared. We're even going to talk about Ginny landing a book deal, growing an audience on Twitter, all the fun things that I think a lot of other folks in this group are thinking about. But yeah, Ginny, you nailed it. I would love to start with the origin story of the blog that I don't think started as a comedy blog and where it ended up. I'd love to start there.
Yeah, totally. I interned at Facebook one summer, and they give out ad credit to their interns, or I guess anyone who works there. And I couldn't really think of what to spend Facebook ads on. And this was like a long time ago. I want to say this was like maybe 2014. Back when we didn't know as much as we know today about Facebook. Anyway, we still knew too much. But so I started running dating ads for myself just because I thought it would be like funny. And I made these like silly dating ads. And then I wrote like a blog post about it and got some traction from it. And the blog was called like, should you make Facebook your new dating app? And then I started doing that with other websites. Like I did one with Google where I bought search words for myself, and Uber, trying to pick up like Uber drivers. This was even before Uber Pool. So once Uber Pool came out, I feel like everyone was using Uber as a dating app, but I got there first with my data analysis. Yeah. And then it was really fun, honestly, especially because I was working in tech and I didn't find my job super creative. It was like, and I had never done anything like it before. It was like my one creative outlet. And it turned slow. Originally, like I wanted to analyze data, and I scraped OkCupid profiles at one point. I like made a word cloud out of my like coffee meets bagel like profiles that I looked at. I was actually trying to do data science for a little while, but not that hard. And I would get these like angry emails from other data scientists being like, this is why women shouldn't do statistics and like stuff like that. And it was like very not rigorous. So then it just shifted into being like a comedy blog. But yeah, there was like one time where this guy who I actually like didn't really know, although I later briefly dated him, he put one of my articles on Y Combinator. No, wait. I think Hacker News. Do you guys know Hacker News? Okay, and it was like really trending, and no one reads Hacker News except like everyone I knew, like in San Francisco. Like it's not like I don't think it's like a huge website in general, but I will say like that time, like maybe 10 guys, I also did like an enormous amount of online dating, and maybe 10 guys I'd gone on like first dates with tech, because they were all software engineers. They texted me to be like, I saw it on Hacker News. And that was the first time I was like, oh, wow, this is really fun. I like that people can see what I'm writing. I didn't realize that I could write something that people would read. Like I thought it would never get outside my like Facebook friends circle bubble, basically. So that was a lot of fun. And then I had a lull in my job at one point. Like my boss had quit and I didn't have a new boss. I also worked at tech startups, which can be so great because sometimes you just go a really long time without having anything to do. Sometimes you have way too much to do, but no one was like keeping track of what I was doing. So I started taking a stand-up comedy class, and I don't know, before long, like I was just like writing jokes instead of doing my job. But it was still like, the company was very disorganized, so no one noticed for a long time. So that's my origin story.
Oh my God, this is just a gold mine of jumping off points. But before we even proceed, I just have to ask, what does a dating ad look like on
Oh,
Facebook? What did these ads?
maybe I should try to, honestly, I deleted a lot of my old writing, which I probably regret doing. Oh yeah, I am the editor of Little Old Lady. Or I used to be, I'm retired now, but wonderful site. I highly recommend it. I had one that was like, I may not be the girl of your dreams, but I am a girl. I had one that was like, it was like me doing yoga pose. And I said, I like puppies, yoga, and you, or like call this number to have an okay time. I don't know, like very like self-deprecating, but people weren't running dating ads on Facebook. So it was like more, and now Facebook, I think, has its own dating app. I don't know. The weird thing is this was like 7 years ago, which doesn't sound like that long ago, but the internet changes so much that like people weren't, today everyone's using every app for dating, but this was like before people were doing that. Now it's like, I honestly I meet people off Twitter and stuff, but I feel like this was back when it was more absurd almost. Like it was weirder and just very silly. I don't know. Yeah.
God, that's awesome. I know every new app is fun for the first 2 years and then overthrows governments. That's like the short history.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what happens to TikTok.
Yeah, oh God. We're moments away from the world ending.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing I'm really curious about is when you started to maybe have an intuition around maybe there's something here with the writing thing or the comedy thing, maybe like I actually could make that into my full-time work and make a career doing it. I'm just curious to hear maybe that transition and when you decided like, I'm going to go all in on this.
Yeah, so I went all in when I quit working in tech and moved home. Well, I'm from New York, so I moved there for a little while, which I guess is probably when I went all in, but I don't think I even knew it at the time. Like, I think I thought I was just like taking a break and kind of figuring out what to do next. I don't think I ever have, or even have still had a point where I feel like writing is like fully my career. Like it's such an unstable, I think maybe like before the pandemic a little bit, but yeah, it's definitely like every new project feels like it's its own thing, as opposed to, I should probably have a better mindset about it where I just tell myself that I'm a writer, and I do, and I consider myself a professional writer, but yeah, there was never a point where I was like, oh, this is it. You've achieved the goal. And I don't think that I'll get there. I think a lot of people don't. I feel like it's like writers are maybe like just naturally unsatisfied. Like, I'm very grateful for the work I do. Yeah, but there was never like a light bulb switched on and I was like, this is it. That being said, there have definitely been like big moments. I would say my first like New Yorker article, which was honestly like to this day, definitely my most successful one, which kind of like like my expectations for all the others were super inflated, but that was like very exciting because the article went viral. It's always, yeah, anything that goes viral is really cool, even if it's just like a tweet and you don't, like make any money or nothing comes of it. It's just like cool to have people you don't like haven't talked to in a while be like, I saw that thing. It just makes you feel like, it's just like, I feel like with the point of writing is to have people read it, basically, and to make sure you can get outside your bubble of people personally, and that like someone is, even if it's just a tweet and someone says they thought it was funny, it's just nice to know that someone you don't know has enjoyed something you've created, basically, or someone you do know. But yeah, it is cool when stuff is like big on the internet.
Yeah, that's something I was curious to hear from you is how I think a lot of folks, like maybe there's so many different stories of people that I follow who had like their first big hit and that unlocked a lot of opportunity. It found them some new loyal followers and readers and stuff like that. And it was almost like this unexpected hit moment. And I think of the blog Wait But Why, but he wrote a blog post about how to be annoying on Facebook. And for whatever reason, that just totally broke the internet and really launched what was a very obscure blog into, some mainstream popularity. So I guess I'm just maybe curious to hear the story of how the New Yorker piece came together, and maybe if there have been any other, maybe didn't feel like it at the time, but like defining moments and how they came to fruition.
Totally. I mean, that New York article, so the article is called Toxic Femininity in the Workplace. And it's a lot of it is inspired by weird men I worked with in the tech industry. And I'm proud of the article, but I also think that it going viral is a function of the time that it came out, and it's about luck, and it just hit the moment. It was very much like in the middle of the Me Too movement, and it was making fun of toxic masculinity. So I don't want to, it's not that I think that it was like some kind of thing that can't be replicated, as much as I just got lucky in many ways. That's probably the only time that I've gone viral and had like positive things come out of going viral, which is like, I tweet a lot and some of them get a lot of views, but I feel like that doesn't, I don't want to tell people that tweeting doesn't, lead to anything, but it doesn't really. Anyway, but yeah, so that one was very cool because I hadn't broken into the industry in any way. And so from there, like I got a book deal for a humor book, which was really cool. And I got in touch with a person who's now my manager. We started a relationship then and she became my manager several months later. But that was like very exciting, probably like the most exciting like couple weeks of my career, just because I'd had no interaction with anyone like on the industry side. Yeah. So that, and I really do recommend like humor writers try to get published in the New Yorker because, which I guess sounds like silly advice, but like there's a format to it that I think that people can learn, and those articles really can get like a lot of views, and there are just not that many ways I get a little bit disheartened imagining how I would have moved up without that. You can do a lot of work and still not in comedy writing at least, and not really get like the attention of the industry. So I really do recommend the New Yorker because they let anyone submit. That's what's so amazing about them, is that other publications I've written for, I had to like form relationships with the editors on Twitter in order to even pitch them and stuff. And the New Yorker, like it's on their website how to submit. So yeah, I do think that they're a really cool publication for that reason. And yeah, so that was very exciting. And then I've had other like exciting moments in my career, but it came from like already being connected with like my manager, and now I have a book agent and stuff. So I would say that one New Yorker article was the only time that it was like a shot in the dark. Like I sent it to this editor who didn't know me. It got published and then went viral, and then I got in touch with other people from it. So that was, yeah, I would say that I would describe that as the big thing. And it's probably like a 600-word article. That's the thing, is I also recommend people try Satire if they're interested in humor writing, because it can be very short, as opposed to like writing a pilot and then submitting it for fellowships, which is another thing people do. Like those are they probably have a lower acceptance rate than the New Yorker, and it takes a really long time to write a pilot. Yeah, I do recommend Satire.
I love it. Yeah, Lyle, I agree with Lyle's comment here. I also had no idea you could submit cold to the New Yorker.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. So yeah, it's funny. I think comedy writing is such almost like an underappreciated medium or format. And I know a lot of the folks in Compound are more like nonfiction writers. So maybe this is a hopeless question, but I'm going to shoot it anyways. What advice would you give to people who are just trying to inject a little bit more humor and maybe even life into their writing? What have been some of the lessons you've learned on how to really write things that resonate and get a reaction?
Totally. I also write nonfiction in terms of, and I think that everything benefits from humor. I even think like journalists should make the news funnier and stuff. I don't know. I think more people would read it. And I don't know. Yeah. So I think to inject humor, like you want your audience always to relate to whoever is telling the story. Even if it's a nonfiction story, it's still a story. So like you want them to be inside the brain of the narrator, and which is likely you if it's like a first person essay or something. And so even if you're writing about something heavier or something sad, like you can still let them know how you think, basically. And so there are still going to be like funny intricacies to like the illogical way that your brain works and something or whatever. And I actually, as much as I just said that Twitter is useless, I do think it's really good as a writing tool for figuring out which of your thoughts are the most relatable, basically. Like if you just have an interesting thought or something that you know is really like hypocritical or that you're thinking yourself and you tweet it out and a lot of people respond to it, you might realize that it's like a funnier, like I feel like you'll figure out which of your thoughts are more relatable and therefore potentially funnier. And I guess another thing that Twitter's really useful for that I should point out here for nonfiction writers, if you're looking to write like a personal essay for some publication, for the most part, I think that Twitter is really good for pitching. So if you can figure out who the editor is and DM them, and I still have their email in their bio. I think that it can be like, there's a lot of websites you can't just go to the website and figure out who to send an article to. For some of them you can, but it's better if you can form some kind of connection with the editor so that they open your email. So if you even just DM them on Twitter being like, I'm a writer, I'm interested in pitching this, and then they give you their email, they'll at least recognize your name. So I would really recommend using Twitter to pitch things for sure.
Yeah, and I love this advice to a lot of humor is just like getting really into clearly expressing the perspective of the writer and like making that worldview clear, even if it's absurd or obviously filled with conflict or contradictions. One thing that like, I don't know, I'm guessing here, but I don't think many people in the call have done is what I think is probably one of the hardest mediums of all time in any creative pursuit, which is stand-up comedy. And it's everyone gets nervous putting out a tweet to their 12 followers. And that is really tough to do. And I can't imagine what it's like to stand up in a room of people who you don't know, who are there to be entertained, and you are trying to make laugh. So I guess I don't even know where to start here, but what has stand-up comedy maybe taught you about just generally choosing ideas, writing things that really resonate and get a reaction from folks? I'm just curious what you've learned as you've done stand-up over the years.
Totally. I will say on the topic of like Twitter versus stand-up, I actually find Twitter like vastly more terrifying because stuff can just backfire so fast. Like I've just had tweets that deeply offended people and I like didn't really even check in. Even if I go, this is like the downside of trying to build a Twitter following is that the bigger following you have, the more likely someone is to get mad. And that doesn't really, in stand-up comedy, I'm sure I've said things that offended people, but I didn't really know because they weren't able to just like comment on it. That being said, though, it is true that like it's way scarier to get up on stage and know that something, I think also for someone who's never done it before, I'm now so used to bombing and so used to doing stand-up for 3 people and stuff that like the idea doesn't really bother me of getting up on stage and having no one laugh, but I understand, I remember the fear and it is brutal the first dozen times or so. I haven't done stand-up in a year, but even like right before the pandemic, I had some bombs that were brutal. In terms of what it's taught me, I think it's really good for brevity, for figuring out like how to just cut every word that doesn't matter. And that comes in handy with all kinds of writing. So like with stand-up, one of the things is like, it's probably far and away like the most edited work that I put out. Stand-up, like if I'm telling like a 10-minute set of jokes that's intended to be my best set, like it's jokes that I've told like hundreds of times and iterated on wording variations and everything and like really cut out any word that isn't necessary. And I don't give that kind of detail to most of the things I write just because I don't have time, or it's like also like I've been doing stand-up for 4 years, 5 years if you count this past year, and I would present my stand-up in the form of a 10-minute long set. So it makes sense that it's heavily edited because it's not all that much material basically. But anyway, what I learned when I cut these jokes down to like their most succinct form is just get rid of any word that doesn't matter. And sometimes I get feedback from editors on essays or like something I've written where I send them something that's 1,500 words and they ask me to send back like an 1,000-word version. And I think I can't really just cut this down by a third without losing a lot of the meaning. But then I realized that I can. There's always just, once you start thinking about whether or not you've repeated, like you don't need to provide some exposition because you provided it up earlier or something, like, yeah. And that's a really common piece of feedback I get is just someone asking me to cut a large number of words, and stand-up's really helpful with that. And also I think it's really helpful with just not being afraid to put stuff out there. But I think Twitter is helpful with that too. Once you get into the habit of just presenting your work, it becomes not that scary for it to fail. I don't know, like I tweet so many things that I delete right away because they don't get any likes, and it doesn't really bother me at this point. But I did in the beginning. Like it's just like the more you put stuff out that no one responds to. And the other thing that I always tell people, I feel like maybe I'm not like enough of a veteran of comedy to give this sort of like overall advice, but like people very rarely remember something that's bad. Like you just forget, like when something's bad, if you see a tweet that's not funny, you just forget it right away. If you see someone bomb, unless you see someone bomb on a huge show with like hundreds of people in the audience, like you don't, if you're at maybe you'd remember that, but if you're at an open mic and no one's really paying attention and someone's up there bombing, you're not going to remember. But if someone does really well, you remember their jokes because they're funny and you like want to tell them to people and stuff. So don't be afraid of all the bad content that you put out there. Like the internet, as a result of how virality works, like if people see it, it's because it's good, unless it's so bad that everyone wants to like cancel you for it, which has happened to me. But if people like, yeah, like at the point at which people are paying attention to your work, it's good. And if you tweet something that gets 2 likes, then over 3 hours, then the Twitter algorithm buries it anyway. So just same with stand-up. If your jokes don't work at all, people just stop paying attention and they don't remember, and it's okay. And you'll come back with jokes that do work.
I love that. Yeah, I love the analogy to Twitter, which is something I was really curious about because I think this is a two-part question. I think naturally a lot of people who are writing and sharing their ideas online, you'd rather have a bigger audience than a small one. You'd rather have more people reading your stuff than fewer people. So maybe I'll ask this in reverse, but I'm curious what the biggest downsides are now that you do have a meaningful audience on Twitter, and you've touched on a couple, but is there any like unexpected downside or frustration points now that you've reached this point at which you do have meaningful reach on Twitter?
Yeah, the frustration is that my expectations of what like a successful tweet is just keep altering in relation to my audience. So it's not like I feel like, oh, now that I have a big audience, every tweet I have like hits because so many people read it. It's instead, I'm like, oh my God, if it doesn't have this number of likes within this many minutes, no one liked it. And that used to be a number of likes that I thought was successful. So that's probably more like my own mental issues. And I don't know. But yeah, and then the other big one is that, yeah, people like jump in right away if they disagree with something. I get so frustrated by men on Twitter. If you make a typo, people correct your grammar. I don't know. It's just like people. And I know that there's a way to tweet without letting people comment, but I have a theory that those tweets just get hidden by the algorithm more often. So I don't like to do it. I don't know. I tried to take a month off Twitter in January. I didn't really succeed, but I now go like full days without using it, which I never used to. Yeah, it's for the same reasons that all social media is bad for your mental health. Twitter's definitely bad for my mental health. But that being said, like it's a really valuable tool and I wouldn't want to not have it. But yeah, I would also say as much as I think it's like a really good tool, I feel like you can use it well as a tool without being that invested in it. If you want to use it to track down like editors and stuff, you can just set aside an hour to do that instead of spending all day scrolling. Easier said than done, of course. Like social media is very addictive, but yeah, there are a lot of downsides. And then also because like my tweets do get responses right away, I feel very like beholden to the app. Like I'm not someone who's just like, I'm using it to check on how tweets are doing and just to decide whether to delete things, which I don't have to do, but I do. And it just can feel hard to log off.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Emerson asked a great question that I was going to get into, which is obviously, I think generally success on Twitter or any of these platforms requires consistency and like showing up and actually producing. Emerson asked, did you have to consciously build this habit to share more often on Twitter? And kind of like, how have you done that? Because I think a lot of folks struggle with it.
Yeah, totally. I actually had to consciously start sharing less on Twitter because I think that my tweets were getting buried because I was tweeting too often, but that was like a couple years ago. And I still tweet a lot, but I used to tweet like every 20 minutes. But in terms of building an audience, it was very conscious. Like I went a really long time with just like following random people to try to get them to follow me. And even now, if a tweet of mine blows up, I tell people in the comments to follow me. And I think I get like a higher retention from doing that, which I think looks lame. But I also have my overall philosophy is to like, and this is true in all parts of my life, like I never want to pretend to not be trying. Like I just try very hard. And I think that like one of my main strengths is that I try really hard and I don't see the point in hiding that. I never try to like play it cool on social media. Like I never try to pretend that I like don't care whether or not I have followers because like I do care. So I'm pretty conscious, and like definitely videos I think are really good for getting new followers. Yeah. And also don't be afraid to ask people to retweet you. You can ask me to retweet you. People DM me to retweet them and I almost always do. Just ask. Honestly, this is like a really big trick maybe for all of life, but like people don't like to say no. Like it's just way easier to say yes. So if you ask someone something that it's easy for them to say yes to, they probably will. So I ask people to retweet me. Not as much anymore, but in the beginning I did.
That just blew my mind. You're just 100%. I think it's like the lowest friction thing to do is hit one button instead of.
Yeah. That being said, people ignore me too. And I submit to publications that never get back to me and stuff. You might ask people and they'll ignore you, but it's the same kind of thing where they're probably not really going to remember. Yeah. Especially with the internet, like everyone's bombarded with so much information and interactions and stuff that they just don't remember anything except a really bad interaction or a really good interaction. Yeah. Don't be afraid to just ask someone. If they ignore you, they're not going to like remember your handle. I don't think.
Totally. Yeah. Unless you message the one person who only logs into the internet 10 minutes a day every year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love that advice. I'm going to riff on a question from Peels here. So at what point do you think an idea is worthy from going tweet length to an actual written piece where you'll actually flesh it out? Is there a model that you think of, what's worth turning into something longer form?
Totally. You can definitely gauge it off of what gets a lot of likes on Twitter. For stand-up comedy, because sometimes you can tell a tweet like almost word for word is a stand-up joke, or it can be like the same length. That like I'll turn something into a stand-up joke if it just gets a lot of likes on Twitter. For something that's more like turning something into a satire piece or like a personal essay, I think it has to have more of an edge, or like something that can be expanded in some way, basically. I used to turn my tweets into satire a lot more often, and I don't know why I don't do that anymore, but I guess like for satire, a lot of the times, like the most successful things are like lists of things. So if the tweet is like some kind of list, like I had a tweet one time that was like this was Trump's first impeachment way back in the day. And the tweet was like other ways to get Trump to leave the White House. And it was like, turn the Wi-Fi off, cancel his Netflix account. But it was like a bulleted list of things. And that I turned into a satire article. If a tweet's like about a very personal experience that's like a ridiculous dating story or something, and it gets a lot of responses, then that could definitely be good for a personal essay. Yeah, but I think for converting stuff from tweets, it's really good to just think about I wouldn't just assume that something has to be successful on Twitter also to be turned into something else. If you like an idea, just go with it, whether or not it can be formatted as a tweet.
Amazing advice. I'm going to change gears slightly, but I think these two things are inextricably linked. A lot of your writing and a lot of your comedy kind of calls out poor male behavior. Some of the folks you work with in the tech industry, some bro comments I'm sure you get in your Twitter replies. And I guess given that kind of like tech and comedy are both very male oriented fields, like how did you work up the courage and just like the determination to really keep towing that line and keep pushing that narrative forward?
Yeah, I think one thing that's nice is that I was already used to it. Like TIS Tech is so male dominated. I had a male dominated major in college. I was already used to being around like toxic masculinity. I started comedy in San Francisco with Jesse, hi Jesse, and it wasn't as male dominated as it was in New York when I moved. I think San Francisco is a really nice comedy scene. There were like a lot of women. There were a lot of people who like worked in tech as well. Like it felt pretty friendly, and I didn't have the same kind of, it just felt like a little more welcoming. And so I was already used to doing stand-up by the time I moved to New York. In New York, there are like full comedy scenes that are all men. Or like the New York comedy scene is so big that it's split into a lot of different factions. And there was one place I used to go because it was near my house, and I would go, they had open mics like several times a day, and it could easily be like all men, except for me. And it's hard. Everyone will tell you that it's hard, but it also comes with like benefits. Like I was very like they call the open mics, they call names randomly for who gets to go up. And I like often got to go up earlier because I was the only woman, I think. And I think like people just kind of know it's like an uncomfortable environment. So they wanted to help me get out, basically. Like it was like a weird open mic venue that I wouldn't have wanted to hang out at until 11 p.m. So I think just like keeping in mind that it's worth it, and that like people know that it's hard to be the only woman. Like there are men who know it, there are men who don't know it, and that sucks. But yeah, like a lot of the times on stand-up shows, just like one person being supportive is useful. That being said, like yeah, there are a lot of really shitty things that happen in comedy, and then there are a lot of things that are just so annoying. It's so annoying when someone introduces me before my set by being like, next up, we have a lady. And that happens all the time. And then there's just like a lot of straight up sexual harassment. But I think that's true in a lot of industries. I will say, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously. I found there to be a lot more sexual harassment in comedy than tech, because there's like an HR department and stuff. And comedy doesn't have any of that. So I don't know. I would say I was like somewhat well prepared, but it never gets fun. It doesn't like get better. You just meet. I have a lot of friends who are women in comedy, and like we banded together, and it makes it easier. But yeah.
I'm just curious, do you think like satire as a medium has made it at all easier maybe to make some of these criticisms or like voice some of these issues?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely feel like that's my like satire brand. And I still get like angry emails about it and stuff. My book was called Toxic Femininity in the Workplace. And I do get DMs from men being like, thank God someone's finally calling out women in the workplace. And I was like, oh, it's a joke. But yeah, I got followed by a bunch of accounts that were like, feminism is a cancer. And it was really weird. I'll take any followers I can get. But yeah, the satire community actually is probably the most wholesome of the comedy communities I found. Like I love the satire community. They're very supportive. Also because of satire, because satire is so online and you can do it from your home, it's more welcoming to women. It has more women. If you look at like the New Yorker Daily Shouts page, it's probably like a way higher percentage of women than like a stand-up comedy show. And yeah, it's just like people who are very much like very current, like very self-aware, globally aware. I'm a big fan. So I feel very comfortable in satire. Like it gives me an outlet for making fun of anyone I want. And then I also feel pretty comfortable with this satire writers I know, like throwing around ideas. It's like I write articles making fun of men, like with men. I just feel like it's just kind of people know. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like self-aware men are capable of shitting on men. It's like white people shit on white people and can be aware of what's wrong with white supremacy. Like I feel like anyone who's plugged in doesn't need to like let their ego get in the way of like making fun of something they know is bad.
Totally. You can gauge your audience by who laughs, and
exactly. Yeah.
The people who aren't going to laugh aren't the people you're talking to anyways, in a way.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So one thing I'm just really curious about, given that you've done stand-up, you've obviously built a big presence on Twitter, you've done a ton of writing for all these major outlets, you have a published book and a book deal, is if you were to rewind the clock back to 2014, like how has your voice and just like your own, I don't know if positioning is the right word, that's a little bit of like a marketing term, if you will, but just like how has your voice and like your personality changed over the last, X years?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think I sometimes don't even realize how much it's changing all like at the time. But one thing I'm trying to get away from is I almost don't want my work to be super linked with who I am specifically. Like I'm trying to write more fiction. I'm working on a novel and I'm trying to write short stories and stuff. And like definitely stuff where it's like informed by me, but it's not like an essay that's telling the story of my life truthfully. My stand-up comedy was never like true. Like I never felt beholden to the truth, but it was definitely coming from like a character, and it depended on what I looked like and where I lived and what age I was. And I don't want that as much going forward because I think I have more freedom if I'm not like, sometimes I want to tell the story from the perspective of an old man. Like I want to be able to get into people's heads who aren't mine and invent characters who aren't me. And I don't want to be limited by my own experiences. So I would say that's like how I'm hoping that it will evolve. But how it's evolved over the last, there's definitely just like a marked difference. Cause like I used to be in the tech industry in San Francisco, and a lot of my comedy was making fun of that. And it worked really well in San Francisco because people related to it. Like I've been like in and out of relationships since I started comedy, and that really changes what I'll write about or who I present as a character. And I almost feel more comfortable presenting. I feel like just because I was single most of the time, like I think if I had to craft a stand-up comedy set today, it would make the most sense to pretend to be single basically. And like, but that's what I'm trying to avoid is I don't want the actual circumstances of my life to super affect what I'm writing. I want it to be more about just like really whatever I want to write. I also like a big transition. I quit drinking in the middle of doing comedy, and I used to have a character that was like almost, this is like a little bit reductive, but it was like drunk slut. And not that and I don't say that in like a derogatory way, like that was just like the style of jokes I was going for. And that just feels very, even though I still have jokes that kind of the context of the joke is me being really drunk, it just feels disingenuous now to tell them because it's so far from who I am. So that was a really big transition for me. Yeah. So I'd say like the life changes informed what I would talk about. One thing, like I will say like at one point I decided to clean up my Twitter and go through and delete old tweets. And from before I quit drinking, like every other tweet was about like wine. Like it's just really weird. I don't know. I hadn't even noticed, but yeah. So I would say my life changes definitely affect what my comedy is like.
Yeah, it's funny. I think there's a lot of advice with, I don't know, a lot of the newsletter writing and blog writing that I think a lot of folks in Compound do. That's like, pick your lane and stay in it. And the more specific you are, the better. But it sounds to me like you've been able to evolve as time has gone on and as you've changed. Have you ever had any of that anxiety of, oh, I used to do this bit, but I don't want to do it anymore? Will I forever lose my loyal followers now that I'm changing? I'm no longer the person I was when they started to follow me.
I don't think I'm like successful enough for people to care that much. The only thing I've ever felt that about is I've written a lot about sobriety, and I have followers who I think are interested in my content on sobriety. And from that perspective, I feel very disingenuous telling a joke that references me drinking a lot, because it's not true. I haven't drank in like almost 2 years, and even after I quit drinking, I was still telling jokes about things that had happened when I was drinking. But like now, I don't think I would go back to it, just because I feel like I think it would be weird for people who followed me because they liked stuff I'd written about sobriety. I wouldn't want to tell jokes about drinking. But yeah, I feel a lot of pressure like in the industry to stay in my lane. Like the stuff that I'm currently pitching is I feel very, I don't want to say typecast because that makes it sound too negative, but I'm like, my experiences in the tech industry and as an engineer are like unique in Hollywood. And that's the stuff that sort of makes the most sense for me to pitch content around. And I'm happy to do it because it was really interesting to me. And I also feel like I'm happy, like, I don't care too much about the setting. Like, I just want to create cool characters who like tell funny jokes. But with my eye on the future, my goal is to not have any one set thing that people expect me to talk about. Like, I just want to, I don't know. I also don't have a set medium. Like, I've done a lot of satire, but I'm trying to get into longer form stuff, television. I would like write a movie someday, maybe. I haven't really thought about it, but it's not like it's on my mind or like something I want to do in the future. So I guess I just want to write stuff that's entertaining, and I want to have, that's kind of my main goal, and to have the freedom to write whatever I want. It's entertaining.
Love it. Yeah, something, it's funny, in our last 10 or 15 minutes here, we touched on a couple of these topics, but I almost want to do a few rapid fire topics we haven't gone deep in yet. The first is you've actually gotten a book deal and published a book, which I think is obviously like a huge milestone for any writer, and is probably this, I don't know, at least I have a very nebulous concept of what goes into actually writing a book. I know in your case, it was a collection of essays, but maybe a two-part question. First is, I know the book deal came about from the New Yorker piece, but could you share a little bit more about the story of like how you actually got, signed to do a book deal? I mean, then I'd also love to ask you about the process, but I'll save that.
Okay, sure. Yeah, someone from HarperCollins emailed me and asked if I'd be interested in talking about like a publishing opportunity. And I like had never considered writing a book before. And I didn't really know what like humor books were, or like I wouldn't have known what the genre was exactly. I know what like funny books are, but I just was unfamiliar with. It took me kind of a while to figure out what she had in mind. And they had an idea for a book of essays that would have been a little more serious. And then I think they decided that wasn't a good fit, and I didn't really have essay ideas. I was only writing satire at the time. So we settled on a book of satire. And I basically just like, at the time, the nice thing is I was running a satire website and pitching the New Yorker and McSweeney's all the time. And it was like, that was the one thing I was like confident in doing, was generating new satire ideas. So given the topic of like women in the workplace, I just came up with 50 article titles basically. And then I just wrote them. And it's almost like, at the time it felt like the only book I could have written. Like it was just like an extended version of what I had already been doing. That being said, it was still obviously like a challenge to figure out how to order them and how to make it a narrative, and just even writing so many without getting repetitive was really hard. But it definitely felt like it felt like a logical next step. It didn't feel like it was so exciting to have a book deal, but in terms of the actual so yeah, more on the logistics of closing the deal. I feel really grateful. This editor was just amazing, and she kind of had the idea for it, and she like did a lot of the pitching for me, and like basically like at one point made a PowerPoint presentation and told me to just fill in missing information, and it was really cool. I didn't have an agent at the time either. I didn't negotiate with them, which probably was a mistake financially, not a huge mistake, because I don't look back with a huge amount of regret or anything. But the process just went quickly because I was going at it on my own, and she knew what she wanted, and I was open to anything. And I'm working on another book now, and it is very much like my idea. And I wrote a really long proposal and had to guide it myself and knew what I wanted. And that has been a much more time intensive process because I had to find an editor who I felt like this one was like her vision, but it worked with mine. So it became my vision. And this one, like this new book that I have is like my vision. And I had to find an editor who wanted to like work with me on my vision. Yeah. But it's ultimately a little bit more satisfying. Although the first one was really satisfying too. This just feels like the next step basically.
Yeah, something I've heard a lot of people talk about now with getting a book deal, if that is a route people want to take, is that the best way to do that is to have your own audience and go tweet, go build up a newsletter, go have an existing people who will almost certainly buy your stuff. I'm curious how much you think that factored into your ability for now, I guess, maybe what will become a second book for that to happen. Do you think having an audience was like a big leverage point that made it possible?
Yeah, so the first book deal, I had no audience, but I think that they were going off the success of this article and assuming that the same people who liked the article would like the book. But I don't even know if I had a Twitter account. But this most recent book deal, they wanted, yeah, like when I pitched it, I gave them my social media numbers and like followers I thought who could promote it and stuff. And it definitely factors in. That being said, I truly think, maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but like I have 75,000 Twitter followers. And I think if I tweeted a link to buy my book, like 10 people would buy it. I don't know. Maybe I just like really don't believe it's like all that easy to convert followers into people actually paying money for things. Don't tell anyone I know this is going to be public, but I'm skeptical. I don't know, but maybe I'm wrong. And I don't look closely enough at numbers a lot of the time. Like if I were to get sales numbers for my first book, I wouldn't really know what had come off Twitter. I'll get DMs from people being like, I bought 4 copies of your book. And I'm like, but I have a theory that everyone who's bought like multiple copies of the book has DM'd me about it. I don't know. The numbers just don't really add up. Like for people to be buying it in the way that they say they are. Yeah, I don't know. But people do want to see that you have a big social media presence. So it's definitely helpful. But I don't know. It's really hard to sell books, honestly. Like, good luck if you guys want to do it. It's a really fun thing to do. It's what I do. And I like, this also is maybe not like a great thing to say, but honestly, like you should just assume that like the amount you get in the advance is like the amount you're going to get. Like it's really hard to make back in advance and earn money on them. I think only 5 or 10% of books do. Well, you can still get a lot in the advance or like a very nice amount, but yeah, like I think, I don't know. Yeah, it's pretty hard to, I don't know. The book industry I enjoy it a lot. I read a lot of books, but I also think about how many people who don't read books at all. And then like, just extend that to the world. So it's just harder. They're just harder to sell than like television or movies. Like do it if you, I do it. I'm hoping to sell a novel. I don't expect like millions and millions of people will read this novel. It's a financially tough industry. Not totally. For all books, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually curious, and I promise I'll move on here for the last 5 minutes, but just final question. Do you think there's like some genres that are like easier to take your existing audience and spin into happy readers and customers, if you will, versus others? I'm just curious if you think there's like any situation where maybe a book does make more economic sense for a writer.
Children's books for sure. YA books. I don't know if that would be like an audience that someone would have, but YA books and children's books make a ton of money. And then self-help books. And I follow a lot of like sober writers whose like brand is about like sobriety and getting sober and stuff. And a lot of them, I've bought their books. Like I feel like everyone I follow has written a book or on that side of things. And I think that those books sell really well. I think people really want their advice and want it like in a more extended way than you would get on social media. And in that case, I think it makes sense that someone would want to buy their book. Really popular novels, like obviously sell really well. Like the kind of book that like everyone will be talking about. I feel like there's one book a month that just like everyone's talking about, and that probably this month it's like Milk Fed, or maybe I'm just like, I don't know if you guys have heard of Milk Fed by Melissa Broder, but like, maybe it's about an LA comedian. So it's probably more like something that I would see that might not be that nationally huge, or like The Vanishing Half, like books like there's like one book a month that everyone's talking about. Those books obviously make a lot of money and probably get optioned from television. Oh, I also think the main way books make money. So it's actually really, people in Hollywood, I don't know if you guys are interested in like the television industry or like the movie industry, they don't really love like original ideas. Like they really like to take content that already exists and like option it so that you can make a lot of money off a book that way if someone options it for television, even if they never make it. There's a lot of stuff that studios pay money for that never makes any money, or that they never make, but they still have paid the author like $80,000. I hope I'm not being too negative. I want you to believe that there are ways to make money off the book industry. And I'm still at the start. So maybe in 3 years, fingers crossed, or 3 years, maybe in 5 years, I'll be like, yeah, you can make a lot of money writing books. I would say that I have not made huge amounts of money writing books. I'm only 2 books in and they've been short humor books. No.
Totally. We just need to do the young adults version of any of your previous.
Yeah.
Jonathan, yeah, we have the chat lighting up saying, yeah, I think real talk is very appreciated. You want to know what you're getting into. It's competitive and tough.
Yeah.
Okay. In our last 5 minutes, I'll keep us to the hour here. I think this is a good segue into something I'm really curious to hear your feedback and advice on, which is handling rejection and rejection in all its various forms. The tweet that doesn't get many likes, whatever, the book deal that falls through, bombing on a stand-up night. Curious how you've worked through the inevitable rejection that happens when you're writing and when you're like doing a lot of kind of creative work, if you will. I mean, maybe I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I will say the most frustrated that I feel is when I have an idea that I can't quite get into a format that I'm satisfied with. So it's almost like when I reject my own work, basically, or if I spend all day working on something and just know it's not good. There have been times it's really frustrating if I send something to the New Yorker and I think it's really good and it gets rejected, but that I kind of know that they can only take a certain number of articles. They have a bunch of various interests I don't know how they segment their articles. Like they may well have just received too many about TV that week or something. I don't take it all that personally if something just doesn't fit for them. And same with stand-up, I can think something's funny, and if other people don't, that's just, I don't care. It's a difference of opinion. But what's really frustrating for me is when I don't think my own work is good, and when I spend a lot of time on something and I don't think it's good. That really is hard for me. And I think that what I just have to remember is that I have to get rid of my existing notions of productivity and just remember that writing bad stuff is part of writing good stuff. Or that if I spend an hour working on something that ends up being no good, and then I can it and spend an hour working on something that is good, it's basically just like I spent 2 hours on something good. That's how I try to think about it, is the bad stuff I was getting it out of my system, or figuring out that an idea I thought would work couldn't really work. I'm writing something right now that I had to rewrite it it's for a website, and I literally had to just start all over 3 times, which is really frustrating because I am always trying to evaluate how much I'm making per hour and stuff. But then I just have to remember that the 3rd version is way more likely to be successful because of the first 2 versions I wrote. That's but getting rejection from other people also is really hard. I don't know. You'll get used to it though. I don't know. I get a lot of rejection, and I also get a lot of times, more common than rejection is when I just literally don't hear back. Rejection can almost be nice to know that someone read it. Yeah, but I don't know.
Totally. I love your line about sometimes whatever producing stuff that you don't love is just part of the process to getting something that you do love. And I think I don't know, I find that weirdly reassuring, even though it's not that I want to write bad stuff, but that is somewhat encouraging. You're just sweeping out the room and finding the good stuff. I'm going to end us right in the hour here. So I do want to make sure we end on time. That was the final question that I really wanted to land on. I guess, Jenny, would you offer any wisdom, advice, if you could rewind the clock and talk to yourself 7 years ago as you outset on this journey, what would you maybe leave people with who are just really starting to write and publish a lot more frequently online and really trying to start to build their presence?
Yeah, I would say don't be beholden to any one measure of success. I used to have specific ideas of what I wanted to do, and some of those things I've done and some of them I haven't done, but even some of the things I've done weren't as satisfying as I thought they would be. And yeah, I would just say if you feel good about what you're writing and if you feel good about who's seeing it, that's what matters. Or even if it doesn't even matter if people are seeing it, honestly, just whatever I would say don't hold too closely to any one specific goal. If you're pursuing a creative career, it should be because you enjoy it. So just try to enjoy the process as much as possible and be flexible. But I don't think I would have thought I'd end up being a satire writer, and that I had more success there than in other things. And that's kind of the main thing I do now. So just being flexible about the end point. As long as you feel like you're still enjoying it, I would say.
Amazing advice. That's awesome. I'm jotting all that down. Jenny, where, maybe this goes without saying, but where should people find you? Where should people follow along for your work?
I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Ginny Hogan _. And I link to pretty much all my work there, share everything there.
Amazing. Jenny, thank you for all the hard-won wisdom and for your time. And thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, it was really nice to see.
Yes, it's a blast. And thank you, Juliana, for setting this up and getting us all introduced to do this. I will send out the recording here shortly. And Jenny, thanks again.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for having me. This was really fun. Enjoy the rest of your day,
Awesome.
everybody.
Cool. See y'all later.